Welcome to Episcopals, the public witness podcast where we bring awareness to pressing public policy issues, civic engagement, and help bring your faith into the public square. I'm your host, Alan Yarborough, Director of Government Relations and Global Partnerships for the Episcopal Church. So we're here with Susie Faria, our environmental policy advisor, who covers some other topics as well. It's good to see you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So this is a topic that, or something that may resonate with a subset of our office, but fans of the West Wing and those generally following 1990s politics may be more familiar with this topic as Anwar. For those who haven't watched the West Wing, though, I'm a little bit jealous for people who might do a first watch through after seeing this podcast. It's a great show, but my point is the Arctic Refuge and protecting the Arctic Refuge is not new. So I'm wondering if you could just sort of start out with what is this? What is the Arctic Refuge?
Yeah, so the Arctic Refuge is the country's largest national wildlife refuge. So it is absolutely enormous. It's in the northwest corner of Alaska, and it's one of the most biodiverse places in all of the Arctic, which, as you can imagine, has a pretty specific set of species that live there. It's very cold. It's really extreme. Very short summers with long days and very, very long, cold winters with incredibly short days. It's also home to a lot of polar bear dens and the porcupine caribou calving grounds. So this is a little different from a breeding ground. It's where they actually have their babies rather than where they're breeding. So really important space for biodiversity in this region. Yeah. It also has a very long history and connection to the Gwich'in people, which is one of the northernmost indigenous peoples in North America. They have just been in that region for thousands of years, essentially since the Great Migration happened during the last ice age and human migration ended up in the Americas. They have been there, and they have this really unique and long history, particularly with the porcupine caribou, which they use in a lot of subsistence ways, so for hunting and things like that. And so protecting these calving grounds has been just one of the most important things for this tribe as well. And they actually call it the sacred place where life begins. That's the translation, which is a really beautiful way of looking at kind of the birthing of this incredibly important species that they have such a close relationship to. So it's representative of both the biodiversity, but also of the really intense and long history of an interspecies relationship that is incredibly vital, and of people and land and the connection that holds.
Yeah. Well, and, of course, like all politics is local and these issues matter significantly. At the same time, this sounds like something very specific. So what has drawn you into this? Why do you, Susie, care about this topic?
I mean, broadly speaking, I consider myself a pretty intense animal lover. Before I came to the Office of Government Relations, I actually worked on a couple of different wildlife rescue centers. So I have a very specific knowledge in terms of wildlife and the rehabilitation necessary for those species. That gives me a certain specific context in terms of why I love animals, but it also is one of the biggest reasons why we had to care for and rehabilitate animals was because of habitat loss. That's like overwhelmingly what you see in that context. This particular issue would involve habitat loss for species that don't have anywhere else to go, that migratory patterns and things like that for animals are incredibly important, and disrupting those can be catastrophic to the entire species. It can result in serious declines in population and just ultimately extinction in its worst form, which, we've heard about as a possibility with polar bears specifically for a really long time. I'm from Massachusetts, which has winters, and winter's always been one of my favorite seasons. I really love snow. It's just such a magical thing. And I may not be from the Arctic or have much experience being in that area, but I do understand and adore the beauty that cold climates bring. And they often, because they don't have as many species, they don't always get as much love as some like more tropical or subtropical areas, but they are equally beautiful in their own ways.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So we're here, on a podcast for the Episcopal Church. How and why has the church been involved in this?
Yeah, so the history of this goes back to 1991 when General Convention passed a resolution calling for the full protection of the Arctic Refuge, they essentially said that this should never be an option for oil or gas development or development of any variety in general. And this is also connected to our relationship with the Gwich'in tribe due to colonization and things like that. You know, the Gwich'in people are Anglican and Episcopalian, or a lot of them are to this day. And so it's a bit of our standing with them as fellow Christians and fellow Episcopalians. And also just recognizing their rights and their practices as being completely valid, right? In terms of that, a lot of conversations around Indigenous practices and things can often put them in this really awful light or try to make them sound outdated, and that's just not true. And so this is one of the ways that the church has spoken on, no, this is important to them, therefore it is important to us. And we want to stand behind that. We also have resolutions around subsistence rights of Indigenous people that are a little bit more recent than 1991, but also very important, of supporting those ways of life and ensuring that they have access to be able to continue their cultural practices and be able to live off their land the way that they have for thousands of years. So those are kind of the combined efforts that lead us to work on an issue like this.
Yeah, that makes sense, and sort of coming from different angles. In 1991, another 90s reference, or I guess as some now say, the 1900s, which I'm not sure I can get on board with that one yet.
I don't think I can either.
Yeah, I can't do the 1900s yet. That's like, Titanic era maybe. What's currently going on in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? Bring us to today.
Yeah, it's been a topic of much debate recently. It's gotten quite a lot of attention from the current presidential administration. It has in general from previous ones as well. It's part of the reason why we've been trying to protect it for over 30 years now, is because it's repeatedly gotten this type of attention from the oil and gas industries. Essentially, the most recent developments kind of go back to 2017 under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which passed and essentially called for 2 mandated lease sales. So essentially, the government would lease portions of the land for development, for oil and gas development. Both of those lease sales took place, one under the Trump administration in the first term and one under the Biden administration. The one that happened under the Trump administration brought in significantly less money than was originally predicted. It was kind of a failure in that way, in terms of the amount of revenue expected and versus what we actually got. And then the one under the Biden administration didn't get a single bidder. Nobody even showed up for that. So they went through with it, but they didn't actually, it resulted in nothing. And so the area remains undeveloped. And I also should note from that original lease sale, the lease sailors ended up asking for their money back and not developing because it was just kind of not worth it.
Yeah.
So again, land remains undeveloped in this region. Some of the other things going on here is that under H.R. 1, which we saw signed into law on July 4th of this year, there are 4 mandated lease sales between 2025 and 2032. So within the next several years, there has to be additional lease sales in this area, which again, could be detrimental, but also could result in almost nothing in terms of economic benefit. So it's kind of a big risk for potentially very little payoff, both to the biodiversity in the region, the Gwich'in way of life, but also just in terms of tax revenue, right? Like you're not actually talking about as much money as is kind of being thrown around. And so that has been kind of where we are currently in the legislative sphere. Alaska in general is getting a lot of attention for its potential energy sources. Lots of oil and gas development is possible, although it is in very remote locations that are really hard to get to, that there's not a lot of infrastructure around. And a lot of oil and gas companies just aren't as interested in it for those reasons. So I'm not saying that it couldn't happen, but there are other factors here beyond just this is bad for the biodiversity. This is also expensive for oil and gas companies at the end of the day, and not all of them are willing to put in that type of investment to a new area where they would also have to build roads, build access points, do a lot more than they do in places where there's existing infrastructure for oil and gas development. One of the more recent things that they are predicting could happen, it has not happened yet, but could happen as soon as this winter, is called seismic exploration. And so this is essentially when you have these giant trucks go through the region and basically blast vibrations into the ground to determine what the topography is, where oil and gas deposits are, just what it looks like. And when you're having these massive trucks go through, it can be incredibly detrimental to the surrounding area because you're blasting essentially large sound waves into an otherwise very quiet ecosystem. There's risk of it crushing polar bear dens, and polar bears are already an endangered species, and it can only be done during the winter too. This is because of the way that the tundra works and how hard the ground is during that time of year. It can only be done during the winter. That's another additional thing beyond the potential for leasing and oil and gas development that is ongoing. But it remains a vulnerable place that is not currently protected by law.
Yeah. How could we push for that protection? What can Episcopalians do to make an impact on this?
Absolutely. So Congress has released 2 bills in both the House and the Senate. It's called the bicameral reintroduction. They're bills that have been introduced in the past. These bills would essentially change some of the terminology used in the legal sense to permanently protect the area. Okay. And specifically, it would make ANWR, or ANWR is the acronym here. It would permanently protect it under the National Wilderness Preservation System under the Wilderness Act. And so that would permanently protect it from any kind of development. But this kind of official legal designation has to do with what the difference between like wilderness is versus a refuge versus a national park. Wilderness in this context is areas that the government has deemed undevelopable. It's just a patch of land that is for the wild, essentially. It is for non-human populations. This wouldn't necessarily infringe upon subsistence rights because that's under kind of different categorization. Not an easy word to say. But it would just essentially prevent any kind of development from being able to happen, which is really, really important. And again, it has been introduced in both the House and the Senate. So 2 options, 2 avenues, and there are kind of a consistent, although slightly slow pace of additional co-sponsors on these bills.
Yeah, I love that our office can provide, a chance to take action directly, and that we're engaging as well, just as staff on behalf of the church. But I know there's a ecosystem of other organizations out there that engage, on environmental work or Indigenous rights or different angles. So I'm wondering if you could share, sort of in closing here, any other organizations where Episcopalians can connect on this.
Yes, absolutely. So we call it in coalition. So we are a part of a coalition that has dozens of organizations in part of it. A few that are worth mentioning, the Gwich'in Steering Committee. This is kind of the Gwich'in people's advocacy wing. It is where they release a lot of information about this. They have their own advocacy avenues. They gain support. They bring elders to events, all sorts of things. They do fantastic work. And they're, in this case, one that I want to highlight the most based on our relationship with them. There's also the Alaska Wilderness League, which has been the leader in this coalition for quite a long time. They work on many issues related to Alaska, a lot specifically around opposing oil and gas development more broadly. But they also work specifically on the Arctic Refuge quite heavily and are often leaders in this space. We also, in the faith sphere, we also work alongside the National Religious Partnerships for the Environment, or NRPE. They're a great faith organization and have also been quite vocal in this space, which we're really grateful for their work. And then, of course, dozens of other organizations, some slightly more famous than others, like the Sierra Club's involved. You will also hear from Earth Justice in these spaces, some very prominent environmental organizations as well.
Very cool. It's nice to know that we're not, alone in this. It really takes a lot of people speaking out together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you for reviewing this with us. It's good to have you on the show.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad to be here and talking about such an amazing issue that hopefully we can still protect.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Stay involved through the Episcopal Public Policy Network and browse our action alerts at iam.ec/action. In our next episode, we will talk about ways that you can engage on immigration reform.